Miguel Dorati back here on the MMA Museum podcast, and I got a couple of guests with me. I got my old partner Jeff Osborne joining me, and we're going to do a career interview with women's MMA pioneer Shayna Baszler. Shayna, how are you?
I'm all right. That's weird.
Thank you very much for joining us.
It's still weird. It still feels weird to think of myself as a pioneer.
You're more. You absolutely are. Jeff, how you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing all right. I've been looking forward to this. I always give Shayna her flowers privately, but I never gotten too publicly.
For sure, and that's the thing is she may not think of herself as a pioneer, but I looked up, a little research here. She logged 25 fights. There were times where a lot of those fights were against top 5 women at that point. You know what I mean? Yep. So she was at that point a groundbreaking competitor in MMA, and she's gone on to do other things with her new career and stuff. But we want to focus on what got her there, and that was the MMA stuff. Jeff, what was the first time, before we let Shayna take over, what was the first time you remember meeting her or seeing her?
Obviously it was on video. I can't remember if she had sent me some tapes or if someone else did, but it was on video. And I wanted to get her on the show 2 years before she never fought on a hook and shoot show at the Coliseum, but she did almost break Tara's neck off at the Coliseum.
That's true. Like a week before her fight.
Oh boy, that's a story. Yeah. You want to tell that one right now, Shayna? Go ahead and set that one up for us. Tell us what happened.
It was just there was like women's MMA, the first ever like women's MMA conference. So there was a whole week of like seminars and awards and all this stuff. So a lot of us that had already kind of had a name in the MMA world came to watch. Jeff had like an all women's show where he had up and comers, like people to keep an eye on. So we all went, and I can't remember why, but for some reason like the show was getting started late. And so me and Tara, this is actually like the genesis of my pro wrestling career right here. But me and Tara got in the ring and just were kind of dicking around, and we're like, let's just do a pro wrestling match. And I mean, we didn't know anything. We're fighters. So we were just basically sparring, but then throwing in some suplexes. And I legit did this throw, and there's a picture out there somewhere that pops up every now and then of Tara LaRosa legitimately like straight up and down, maybe this far away from the mat, and I'm like in the middle of throwing her. We were pretty reckless, but
it was almost a scorpion situation. It looked pretty. That Daryl Neer snapped frame by frame of what it looked like, and I'm like, holy yeah, it looked pretty bad, but
pretty reckless in hindsight. But that's what you do when you're young and you think you're invincible.
So let's take us back. Take us back. You're originally from South Dakota, is that right? Or that's where you live when I met you. So take us. How does a girl from South Dakota start fighting? I know there's a scene up there. I know there's some fights up there. So talk about how you got into this.
Yeah, I mean, so back in the day, no one really knew what MMA was. So there was this kind of like, I guess, event, if you would even call it that. But I worked at UPS at the time, and I'd be driving home listening to the radio. And they were advertising these like fights at the Holiday Inn downtown in Sioux Falls. And what it was they got one of the conference rooms and just put gymnastics mats around. And it was kind of funny because the rules were like, so they had boxing gloves with the laces taken out. So like you start with the boxing gloves and you could hit each other. You could throw the gloves off if you wanted to grapple, but then you weren't allowed to punch anymore. So I went and watched one of these, and it was ridiculous. You know what I mean? No one knew anything. It was just tough guys. It was still in the day where people were writing bar fighter as their style and stuff like that. And I had like no intention of doing this because I also, around that same time, there was like a documentary on television that was like about the Gracie family. And they made it seem like, these Gracies like live in secret up in the mountains in Brazil and they train to kill people. Like they put this real mystique around them in this documentary. So I'm like equating this secret ninja Gracie family to like this stuff. So I'm like, no intention of doing this. I go and there was a girl there beating everyone or beating all the other girls simply because she was a boxer. So it was just girls winging wild punches, and just because she could throw straight punches, she was beating all these girls up. And she was real like cocky about it. And I didn't know anything. I knew nothing about MMA or the rules or submissions or anything, but I come from a wrestling family, like an amateur wrestling family. And I just knew, man, I could get in there and take her down easy. And I don't know what I thought the goal was, I guess, but I was like, she won't be able to punch me like that. If I take her down and hold on to her, she won't be able to punch me. And I guess so. I guess my goal was to pin her, whatever. So I start showing up. I start showing up to these fights, hoping, because they, man, back then it was like sign up at the door and they'd like match you up, and there wasn't really weigh-ins. They would just like look at people and see that they were about the same size. And then generally the girls, it was like, didn't matter what weight, because there were so few of us that if the girls showed up, they'd fight. And I started showing up just for the goal of fighting this girl. And I ended up never fighting her, actually. And I don't know what she ended up doing. It's real funny because I was on another podcast and I told this story, and this girl like popped up in the comments on the YouTube video, like, oh yeah, one time we trained together and I beat her up. And I've never, ever had any physical contact with this girl before. And it's just funny, like, but yeah, that was the goal. And it turned into this, and I started having fights, and then,
So at some point, this is the beginning of 2003, October, your first fight is logged here on Sherdog, and it's a reality cage fighting, and that does take place up in South Dakota. Tina Johnson.
So, like, before all that, there was like record keeping, there was like, there was a time where we, like, I'm not joking, like movie stuff. This is how early it was in the sport, is we would go out to this cornfield on this guy's property, and they'd line the trucks in a circle and turn the headlights on. And we would have like, I mean, like it wasn't a street fight, but it definitely wasn't, there was like no commission or way, it'd be like, okay, do you want elbows? Okay, no elbow. Okay. And you'd kind of make this agreement with this person and then have a fight in this field. So there were plenty of those before that are not, I wish, you don't know at the time you're in something like that what it is.
They may still do that in South Dakota.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, then the Holiday Inn thing turned into they got a ring, right? A boxing ring. So then it was like a ring, and then they evolved and got a cage. So now it was this reality cage fighting, and now it's a thing, and now we're keeping track of records. So yeah, it was at the Armory at the fairgrounds, which is where a lot of the old MMA shows used to take place in little towns. It's like the Armory at the fairground, or like the stables or whatever, Yeah.
Now, but somewhere along here, and I'm looking at the list of your fights, right? So you fight Tina Johnson, and you got her out with an armbar. So somewhere in there, you learned an armbar. So how that? So take us through that.
This is, man, it's so funny to think about this stuff now. So we had a guy. The guy that actually put these fights on, he claimed that he trained at Militich. And so he had like puzzle mats down in his garage, and we were just learning from this guy. Years later, come to find out he's a big fraud and he didn't train anywhere and whatnot. It's surprise, surprise. But like, it was the beginning, and it was, man, YouTube wasn't even really that huge yet. So it wasn't even YouTube yet. I was getting like Ken Shamrock's book, and like, oh, okay, yeah, so you put your arm here you know, and getting in this garage, and we didn't know how to train. It wasn't, we just fought. We would just be in the garage and we'd be like, okay, today we're going to grapple, no striking. Okay, now today one person's going to have boxing gloves and one person's going to try to submit them and this person could, you know what I mean? Like, it was just live goes all the time. There was like, yeah, I started learning submissions, and I wish there was footage because it's probably really bad. You know what I mean? Because there was no like this wasn't like jujitsu class or something. This was like, and in fact, so there was a purple belt in town that had a group of guys, and they trained jujitsu and they trained in a gi. And because I was like reading Ken Shamrock's book, and we were just these guys in a garage training, we were like, yeah, jujitsu. They wear those clothes. We're shoot fighters or whatever Ken Shamrock used to call themselves. You know what I mean? Like, he had shoot fighting, I think, as his or hook wrestling or something like that. And so we were like, yeah, forget about those jiu-jitsu guys, you know? So we were, I guess, learning submissions from this guy. I don't know where he learned stuff. He obviously knew a little bit. But then, yeah. And then when he kind of skipped town, I still wanted to learn. So I was like, well, I guess the jiu-jitsu guy is like the only guy left. So started my jiu-jitsu journey.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. How many fights did you log in the South Dakota area that before you actually started, you know, doing road trips with this stuff?
Oh man, I mean, so there was a lot of, so like MMA didn't get sanctioned in South Dakota for a while. Like, the UFC and MMA was getting bigger by the time South Dakota decided to sanction it. So there was always these you know, there's like these shows on a reservation, or there's these I couldn't even tell you is what I'm getting at, because there was it was just like they would call you. I remember there were times where I'd be at work. I worked at this arcade and it closed at 10 on like a Sunday or something. And I remember getting a call in the arcade booth and the guy being like, Shayna, we have a show going on right now and a girl showed up. Can you, when's the soonest you can get here? You know what I mean? Oh man, I just got to close and then I'll run and grab my bag and show, you know, it was like that. It was like, not like today where you do a contract and you weigh in and which is crazy. There was no like blood work. So who knows what mess was flying around all over the place. Like, yeah, there was a lot of that. And there was a lot of, because then the Minnehaha County, which is where Sioux Falls is, like banned MMA. So we could only fight on the reservations. It was real underground for a while.
And it's interesting because then you went over to Minnesota for a couple of fights. And it looks like the madness doesn't end there because like like this is Minnesota. Okay, we're in the United States. The show is called Jungle Madness 2. It's like, you know. And then the next trip there was Battle at the Barn in Minnesota. So take us through some of your trips to Minnesota.
Man, so actually I have a really funny story about one of my fights on a reservation. So we go there and there's another girl and I'm supposed to fight her. And for whatever reason, she backed out like right last minute. We were there. She was there. She like got scared, I guess, or something, backed out of the fight. And the promoter comes up to me and he's like, he's like, hey, so I'm going to get in the ring and get on the mic and tell everyone that this girl won't fight you and kind of call her out. And then I'm going to see if people will throw money in the ring for you guys and see if that doesn't like entice her to fight. Right. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. So he gets in the ring and he's like, who wants to see a chick fight? You know, back when that was what it was called. But the crowd goes crazy. Everybody starts throwing money, like wads of cash over the cage into the ring. So now her and I have a fight for this kind of pile of money. And we have the fight. I beat her. I tell her she can keep the money. And then I had this guy come up to the cage and he had a trench coat and like a cowboy hat. And he was like, he had $300 bills he was digging out of his wallet. And he's like, man, I got to support my native sisters. You're native, right? And I mean, I'm like, yes. He'd probably hear this story now and like not be a fan of mine, but yeah, because I was like $300 at the time, like holy smokes, that's like huge payday, you know. I've been fighting for free and stuff. So that's a funny story that always came up from time to time in the gym. I'd get made fun of. Yeah, and then there was one of those battle at the barns. The girl, I remember it was one of the times where I was like mounted on the girl, pounding her, and she's reaching up and pulling my sports bra down. I was flashing the whole crowd. I remember that too. That's when I started to decide to double bag them, because girl was grabbing at my stuff. But there was a lot of that stuff. And Kelly Cobold was like the girl that ran Minnesota at the time.
Right.
So, you know, she would come up and be like, hey, this girl, we don't like her because she said this or that, you know, like she was kind of like helping me out with info, I guess. Yeah, and it was her gym at the time with Mike Riley, and those guys were like the team for a second, like the hard nose, we go hard team, you know what I mean?
Well, Kelly's got that, you know, Kelly took the next step to be like, you know, a national MMA, you know, she's a legit girl.
Yeah, for sure.
Johnson, you know, no disrespect, but
yeah, for sure. She and you know, this was both of us at the time were not, you know, I don't know if people weren't following or like around or involved or know someone in the sport in those days, it's hard to kind of like iterate to you how like rudimentary everything was. Like it was just like it legitimately, how you would get fights is you would show up and sign your name on a piece of paper. Like it wasn't, you know, and then it was like, okay, I'm gonna call. And as a female, there were so many times that you'd go and there's just not another girl. And so I'd go ready to fight, there's not another girl there. Or it's like you go, girl sees you hitting pads, and then she backs out of the fight. Like because it was just not there. People didn't train like today. Even those of us that took it serious didn't really know what we were doing when it came to training. We were just sparring all the time, you know? So it's even the names like Kelly, same, I'm sure she would say kind of the same origin story. We just got together and fought. And that was, we were like, you know why we're successful? Because we train for real. We train real speed. We don't do these katas and all this crap and this touch sparring. You know, we were like tough. We thought we were hard nosed and tough. But
Jeff, you remember those days? Like, I mean, you know, and there was that process of Shayna and guys girls like Kelly kind of leaving the others behind now, you know what I mean? And like there was an element of like, now they're going to be pros. And this is the inception of it. What do you remember from those days?
So, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, the thing with women like Shayna, she'll take a fight to fight anyone. And you either, as a fighter like Shayna, you'll fight the best on the planet, or you'll take anything. Back in the day, the women didn't get to choose anything. They didn't get to choose any fights. And you know how it is. We would show up in Evansville. We think we have a women's fight, and something happens and it's off again. And then it, you know, eventually it evolved. I mean, it was used as a sideshow on a lot of these things.
Yeah.
It's like, who wants to see two chicks fight? Like you said, throwing the money in there like a strip club or something. But
yeah. And it was like there was no middle ground. Right. So there wasn't we couldn't like build our record like today. So you started getting a crop of girls that were like the top 5-10 of us, and we all knew each other. And we were the ones saying, yeah, we'll fight anyone, anytime, any weight, whatever. If a girl shows up, I'm there. I fought a girl that was like 200 pounds one time. It just, we didn't get fights enough, and we wanted to fight. And then, You had like the girls that showed up that didn't train, that thought they were tough because they'd been in some street fights. Nobody knew, you know, and there was no like, oh, this girl's been training. She's decent, but it's a good fight. Let's do this one. This looks like a good fight for you. There was no like, this looks like a good fight for you, you know, like it was just the top girls or the like nobodies. Really.
It's like in today's day and age, a fighter of like, well, I could fight this number 2, number 3, number 8, do a rematch or the women. Like I have to fight anyone and everyone. Anyone. That's why if you are lucky to survive MMA as a woman with a 50-50 record, that means you were, I think, a damn good fighter.
Yeah.
If you stuck with it. Like back then it was like, even if you had a losing record, if you stuck with it and kept fighting, you were tough. Like,
yep.
Because like everyone
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, everyone wants to be cool and say they fight. It's something everyone all over the world, everyone's thought of punching someone in the face at some point in their life. But not everyone wants to be punched in the face, and the reality of that really is what divided that huge gap.
Right.
Yeah.
And at some point, you know, the real serious ones start rising to the top. Like you joined that group, Kelly joined that group. It looks like the first time you ran into a girl who might have been ahead of the learning curve with you is in, was it Colorado where you faced Amanda Buckner?
I think I fought Kelly before I fought Buckner. And
yes,
Kelly was the first, so Kelly beat the snot out of me. It's the first time I fought a girl that had any sort of training at all. So I was fighting all these girls local, beating them really fast. And then here's Kelly Cobold, who, you know, she beat the snot out of me. I needed to do it because I needed to know that like, it's cool. You're beating girls because you know a little bit more. But like when Kelly, who knows just as much, and she's a lot more experienced in that aspect, she beat my face in like I was Sloth from the Goonies. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, is this something I want to do? Took a couple weeks off and I was like, no, I got to get back in there, man. So you know, I knew that was it. And then Kelly for a long time was like my goal, right? Like I got to have that back. I want to fight a girl that knows stuff. But yeah, then I had Buckner. Was it Buckner?
It's a road trip too.
Was it Buckner in
I'm seeing this Ring of Fire, which I think
is Ring of Fire, Sven.
Yeah.
And I think Buckner was like her and Jay Jack were from there, and so she was like the girl of that promotion. So I don't think anyone expected me to last any sort of time. And like I said, this was the same story for all the girls back then. I'm sure she had a bunch of local girls that didn't really train, and her and Jay Jack trained for real. And, you know, she's beating all these girls. So to get an opportunity, and from Sioux Falls to Denver is a 10-hour drive. And we drove that. And that was a time where I had to make weight. But like, I thought this was big time, man. They had weigh-ins at Dave & Buster's. And I got a hotel room. Like this was like, oh, I'm fighting pro now. And back then there was no amateur and pro. Also, there was just you're fighting or you for no money or some money. But I thought that was big time, man. And it was like lights and this huge show and this huge production, and yeah. And I did well. You know, I was happy with how I did against Buckner, but it was definitely like I said, the gap was huge. I'm beating all these girls that don't do anything, and now it's like Kelly Cobold and Amanda Buckner, and it was a big jump. But I think you know, I started showing I could hang with these girls, and I think that's when I really started turning some heads. It was like, who's this girl who's not just getting trounced by these girls that I know? You know what I mean?
Now, I think the next time up, I think I match made you the next one.
In Atlantic City?
No, this is Racine, Wisconsin.
Oh,
and, you fought Julie Kedzie, but
yeah.
I was Dave's matchmaker.
That was fun. I loved that show because it was like pride rules plus elbows.
Oh God.
Right. So it was like, it was crazy. So for people that don't know, it's like, you can either, so in the US, it was like, there was no, kneeing someone, a grounded opponent, kneeing or kicking a grounded opponent. Meaning if someone was on all fours, you couldn't grab like a front headlock and knee them in the head. But in Pride, they allowed that in Japan. So there were these kind of two different rule sets, but Japan didn't allow elbow strikes because they thought it cut people and ended fights too early. So, but in the US, you could elbow. So it was this kind of like what set of rule, the two kind of most popular rule sets. And Dave Strasser's show was you could do anything. You can knee the head of a grounded opponent, you could elbow them, do it all. It was great. He was my my like first big name win, you know what I mean? So I think that's when I started appearing on everyone's radar for the most part.
And it holds up because, you know, at that point, now you've got Amanda Buckner, you got Julie Kedzie back to back. Then you get Amanda Buckner, then Roxanne Modafferi, then Tara LaRosa. So all of a sudden, now you're in the thick of things. Let's talk about the rematch with Amanda, because it looks like you beat Julie and went right to fight Amanda for me on the MFC show, the Atlantic City show.
Yeah. So I had an opportunity for Buckner again, which I was really looking forward to, because I think, you know, like, I think in hindsight, mentally, the first time I fought Buckner was like the first legit, like big show, professionally put together. I think it just got to me. You know what I mean? I think I was still kind of in my brain, like small time. What if I make a good showing type of mindset? But I think like the show for you in Atlantic City was like, man, I can beat her. I can beat Buckner. You know, so we really wanted that. And you know, she ends up beating me, but again, it was one of these things where it was real back and forth. There were some times where it looked like I was going to win the fight, and she ends up knocking me out. Just got my back, and by that time, late in the fight, just pounded me from the back. But you know, it was a really good fight. That's still a fight I'm proud of. I remember
deep in the third round.
Yeah, almost went the distance. I remember Keith Mills, who's like legendary photographer guy, wrote up a thing and was like, who the heck is this Shayna Baszler? And I remember like, okay, let's go, you know, and that show was the first time I met Tara. And if you know Tara at all, you know you have to like get beat into the Tara Friendship Club. She hates everyone until you win her over. But yeah, I remember walking up and introducing myself because she was at that time there was argument like Buckner and Tara, who's number one, who's number two. I specifically remember, and Roxanne was up in there too. So it was like those three kind of like kicking around, who's number one, who's number two, who's number three. So I had all of them like back to back. And yeah, that's when it was like serious now. Now I'm training at a legit Muay Thai gym. Now I'm doing jiu-jitsu. Now I'm training with the we have a really good wrestling program at the college in Sioux Falls. They're a D2 school, but they're all, you know, they're like million-time national champion, whatever. So I was going to off-season wrestling practice there with them. And stuff was getting serious. We were cutting weight. Because now it was just top girls. You know, it was no more of these like nobody girls anymore. It was just like big shows, and now we're saying things like we won't drive more than 5 hours if you know like that. Like thinking we were big time, but
now Tara fought Akano, Hitomi Akano. That might have been your first exposure to the Japanese aspect of fighting in MMA, and I know that would intrigue you too. And why don't you talk a little bit? Did you have any interactions with Akano or just pass by?
So not with Akano at the time. I had done some training because Josh was very involved with Megumi Fuji. Josh lived in Japan a couple years, and Megumi came to train with us a few times. Obviously, Megumi is like the first girl that Josh really coached, like for real.
Yeah.
And Megumi is the best women's fighter there's ever been. Was way ahead of her time. So I knew, and then just being a fan of, I've always kind of leaned towards the Japanese side of pro wrestling, especially as a female. In the United States, women's pro wrestling was pillow fights and
Wendy Richter.
garbage. Yeah. So Japan had like legends, and they were beating the snot out of each other. And so I knew just from knowing about pro wrestling that the pro wrestling in Japan is more legit, because in my understanding at the time I was like, everyone knows how to fight for real there, because their pro wrestling's for real. So if they pro wrestle, they fight, and vice versa.
Right.
So I kind of just knew. And to be honest, like in pro wrestling nowadays, it's kind of the same. Like when I have to like face a Japanese girl, it's like, okay, I'm gonna have to beat the snot out of her, because they can take it. Because
You kicked Asuka's tooth out, correct?
I kicked her straight in the mouth. Here's a quick story. I kick her straight in the mouth, and I come to the back, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And she's like, oh, no itai, no itai. No itai means no pain. No problem, no itai. I don't know why. And she was like, that's just how they are, though. And so in fighting, it was kind of the same, where I was like, man, these girls can go. And they were a little bit flashier, right? The Japanese girls, like, they always did, they got these like cartwheel cabo kick, and like they did the spinny looking stuff. I can't explain it, but they were always a little bit flashier with their style, but real slick about it. It worked for them, so, but also the pro wrestling fan in me, that's when I really became a Tara LaRosa fan, because she's fighting this Japanese girl, and Tara comes out, with the cowboy hat and the big American flag, like, and I was like, hey, that's pro wrestling. So
yeah. Now, I know that you obviously impressed, because your next fight was the big trip to Japan for the secret Bodog fight against Roxanne Modafferi.
Yeah. And that was my first trip to Japan, and to this day, I still tell people that was my favorite trip. I went when I started pro wrestling, there's like this kind of rite of passage where you live and wrestle in Japan. So I went and lived there for 3 months and just toured around with this company. And I still say, like, man, that trip I had when I fought Roxanne in 2006 was like the best time. I don't know, it was just fun. And I mean, it was like super hidden, so there wasn't a big crowd. There was just like a handful of people in there. It was like before a different show going on, because we were taping it to be played at a later date. And it was another thing where I think I came in, and like I said, Roxanne was up, for sure one of the top 3 girls in the world at the time. And I got her with the Shayna wing, crazy hammerlock submission. That after that fight, by the way, and I don't know, maybe you'll talk about this, but I had a fight in Minneapolis, and I broke a girl's arm, like spiral fractured her humerus with that submission. It was gross.
I was gonna say, not only is it, it's a slick submission, but you were mean doing it.
It was yeah. But I got Roxanne in that submission. And we all know Roxanne, and this is like really on brand for her. I beat her. I hear her yelling in the locker room. She was very, very mad that she lost. But then comes over, and I had, for whatever reason, I had like a day and a half before my flight home. So she took me and my corner man like all over Japan the whole rest of the day. We like went to these crazy 6-story toy stores. She showed me this Buddhist temple, and it's very on brand for Roxanne. Like, she's so mad. We just had a fight, beating the brakes off each other, and still comes out and is like, "Hey man, let me show you around." It was so cool, and just I don't know, the food, like Japan is just great. It's still my favorite place to visit. Like, even with my wrestling today, I love going to Japan. It's great.
Yeah. Now, I remember after the Roxanne fight that night, we all went out to dinner as well. And I always tell the story there. I will let you tell it, but most Americans know what sushi is. And then, sashimi is the raw fish with no rice.
Just the protein, yeah.
Yeah. So take us through the rest of it, Shayna.
Man, so they brought out this plate of sashimi, and I'm eating this stuff, which I guess, I don't know. That's a roll of the dice if you're in a foreign country and you're not going to ask what it is. But honestly, if I knew what stuff was, I wouldn't experience as much as I do, because I'm eating this, and if I'm being honest, it's pretty good. But I ask, yeah, what is this? And it turns out this was horse sashimi. I was eating raw horse meat.
Yep.
And that's what I'm saying, is if I would have known that before, I wouldn't have eaten it. But I ate it. It was pretty good, real lean.
It was. It looks like that carpaccio, like that ham that you get at fine Italian places and stuff.
Yeah.
But I looked at it and I was like, and they call it, the reason it's interesting is, like, I'm like, what's this? And they're like, ba sashimi. And so they only do is they put ba at the beginning of sashimi, and that indicates it's horse. And I was like, okay, but yeah, Shane's more adventurous than I was.
It was good
with the rice wine.
Man, that was a funny trip too, because I was over there with two other guys, Diego and oh man, I can't remember the other guy. But we became friends because we were just the English speakers, and and to cut weight. So Japanese bathrooms are very tiny, and I remember to cut weight, I just put on my plastics, my weight cut suit, and turned the shower on super hot in the bathroom, and just stood in there I sat like a steam room, and then I would crack the door open to breathe a little bit and stay back in there, and yeah.
I remember Diego's from Argentina. He was there to do one of the secret fights too. Yeah, he won his fight as well against a Japanese opponent. That is Vysotsky, Diego Vysotsky.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Jeff, so what do you remember about her next fight is Costa Rica? Where you were the announcer, and her next fight is Tara LaRosa. So she beats Roxanne. Tara at this point is either on her way to fight Amanda Buckner for the belt, or has already fought Amanda Buckner for the belt. I'm going to double check that while we're looking.
Well, I remember I wanted Shayna to win. It's one of those, me and Tara have a love-hate relationship because I'm always right.
That's everybody.
Everything. Yeah, every time it would kill her when I was right. And we would bet on the women's, we would bet on the women's fights, and Tara welched on bets more than once. So I was hoping Shayna, Tara can tell you a story about how I totally gained access to her hotel room and ordered a bunch of undesirable movies, ate all her food, and then brought some of her undergarments to the after party after I wallpapered her wall, But I remember wanting to see Shayna win, and I remember it being hot as hell that day. And
man,
yeah, it was bad. But
it was like 110 degrees.
And that mat had to been. They had to build shade, yeah. So there was when the sun moved, so they built a canopy to kind of cover the ring. But when the sun moved, it only covered half the ring, and there was a side of the ring that was in the sun that was too hot to if you were gonna get taken down and play from your back, it was too hot to lay there. Yeah, you had to call some moves. You had to call some moves.
Yeah.
Now, I bet you could have baked the egg on the damn ring at one point before they put
That
all
was
the
that was so cool though. That ring was right on the beach. Like I could have jumped off the top turnbuckle into the ocean. Like it was on the beach. It was like crazy, and this great idea for Bodog to like have these exotic locations, and like we're fighting, and I had Tara beat too, and she knows it. But that was like I started training at Minnesota Martial Arts Academy a couple times a month because they're only like a 3-hour drive, 3.5 hour drive from where I lived. And that's like Greg Nelson and Sean Shirk, and she hadn't really started fighting yet, but Caitlin Young was training there. And so I remember like being fully confident, like I can beat Tara. Like, look at her leg. I could kick her leg to death, which I did. And then I got her in the Phantom choke, we called it, like the Von Flue choke, people call it, but it was before Von Flue did it, I think. But nobody knew what it was. And so she grabbed me in the head. I was pinning her, and I knew I had it. But Tara, being this like savvy vet, and she'll tell this same story. She's like very close friend of mine, so by no means am I maliciously talking shit. It's all in good-natured fun. But she said she was done. The submission was in. She couldn't breathe. She was going out. But being a savvy vet, she looked up at the ref and was like, and like faked it. Was like, this ain't doing anything. And so he was like, come on, Shayna, you got to move or I'm going to stand you back up. So I just, in my head, was like, oh man, weird. It's not working, and let it go. And if I would have just stayed there, it would have had her. But
and that fight was for the belt.
Yeah. So
damn it, Shayna.
So I had her beat. She'll tell that story too. She told me that afterwards. There's something about fighting when you have a really good fight with someone. There's like a bond you have that I don't know. I can't explain it. You guys have probably seen it, witnessed it 100 times. You have there's like a side of a side of you that only that person knows, because no one else experiences it the way they do. So
yeah, my first fight, the guy dripped nipple sweat in my mouth. So he wasn't exactly small. Chad. Chad.
Yeah. I know. I've done screen caps of that fight for hours.
Oh, God.
But yeah, no, Shayna, you're right. I remember who was it? It was there was a Russian fighter we bought in, and he fought Joaquin Hansen. It was Joaquin's only fight in the States, and afterwards, after the fight, I walked by. We're in a casino at the bar, and there they are drinking together. That's the essence of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They don't speak a language; they can't talk to each other. But
this is universal.
Yeah, for sure. So, so those are the Bodog fights with where am I here?
And that's where I first met Josh.
See, I thought you guys knew each other beforehand. I knew Josh from Hook and Shoot. He was there coaching, and I just knew because Josh was always at a time where it wasn't popular. He was very outspoken about being supportive of women's MMA, right?
And that women can fight, and that he will train women. So I always kind of looked up to him as he's like a top guy supporting us. And so after my fight, I just lost to Tara. Leaving the ring, I'm walking by him and I stop and I'm like, and this isn't like me. I'm not a person that like marks out over people or whatever, but I was like, Josh, I just want to say thank you for all your support or whatever. Can I get a picture with you later? And he's like, yeah. And then at the one of the infamous Bodog after parties, I got my picture with Josh. I was doing magic tricks with cards, and that's where he gave me the Queen of Spades nickname.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
I was the only sober one on that entire continent, I think, that night.
No, you and Dave Strasser. Strasser's sober. He's whacked out of his mind, but he's a sober dude.
He doesn't need it.
It's funny that same part, and that was, so people get an interesting perspective. That was the highlight of Bodog, I think. It was.
Yeah, I do too.
We did 12 fights, 3 days in a row. So like the middle people are like, it's fight day, but then for the other people, it's post-fight day. And then for the other people, it's pre-fight day. So like that middle day was very, woo.
Yeah.
But the after fight party was everybody cutting loose. And yeah. Was Fedor at that one?
I don't think he was at that one.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Okay, yeah, Fedor was at the first Costa Rica one too. So well, they were all fun. They were all fun.
But for me, I think that was the greatest time of MMA. You had so many people competing for fighters. I mean, there were groups we've forgotten about, like Pangea and that AFC that Tara signed with that never happened. Yeah, there were 8 big giant groups, and it was a fighter's market. You could go wherever you want. You can get paid the most and fight the best people. And
it was like the first time women were getting paid legit.
Right.
Like we started finally making paydays that were comparable to the men, which is great because, we'd been the sideshow attraction. So I was making whatever everyone tossed into the ring, or like I'm lucky to get my couple $100 on top of my gas reimbursed. Like,
yeah,
there was a lot of like before this where it was like I got promised $200 to fight, but then the guy's like, oh, my lockbox, I've locked the key in my truck and it's in there, I'll mail it.
Give me that freaking lockbox.
Yeah, like there was a lot of that stuff. And being in pro wrestling right now, it's very similar to the way pro wrestlers come up in the indies. And actually it's kind of funny because I was training I did a little bit of training with Chavo Guerrero, and he told me one time, because pro wrestling is very you gotta put your time in, and so you gotta build the ring, you gotta carry the bags of the people that are above you, And I remember I'm doing all this stuff, and Chavo was like, don't forget that, like, you have paid your dues. You've done this stuff. You've gone to shows and driven 10 hours for gas money to go do this, like, and especially the branch that I come up with Josh Barnett and Billy Robinson. It's like, you had to, okay, so like even pro wrestling, and we all know what pro wrestling is, but the way that I came up and back in the day, it was like you had to fight for real in order to earn the honor of being able to get in a ring and do professional wrestling. So he was basically telling me, like, you're the one that's come up in this the right way. So like, don't carry that guy's bags. You know what I mean? Basically saying like, you don't forget, you're not like super green young boy, they call him, like
That's
so
cool.
Like, it's the same sort of stuff. So now we're in this time period where it's like, we have all these opportunities and we're getting paid. And I bought my first, and it wasn't even new, because I think it was like, I don't know, it was like $3,000 and $3,000 at Bodog or something. I don't remember exactly, but it wasn't, like life-changing money. But I remember I bought a car, and it was the first car I didn't have to like keep together with duct tape. And I thought I was in the big time. Like, but it was cool. It was a cool time for sure.
That's definitely interesting that you say that, because I've been thinking, and I don't want to digress too far off the subject here, but this whole Jake Paul thing, I think what's a problem with that is the same thing you're saying about, he paid no dues in boxing, and boxing is about paying dues. You know what I mean? Those kids that went to Golden Gloves every weekend and, at 15 and stuff like that, he's circumventing all of that and kind of slapping them in the face. So I think that paying dues comes up in all the combat sports, and it makes you real legitimate. There's kudos to Chavo too.
Yeah, there's something to be said about the respect you earn, especially with your contemporaries, for coming up that way. The argument like I make with Jake is like, you like, it's kind of the Ronda CM Punk effect, where it's like, this guy maybe is paying his dues in a way, but it's just he's so well known that it's very visible. Like me paying my dues was not visible in front of millions of people. Like,
he's got asses and eyeballs that we couldn't get as wrestling fans.
And that's my argument to people that are like, he should fight a real boxer. And I'm like, no boxer fights a real boxer in his third fight. Like, the dude is right on par with where he should be. It's just the fact that you see him is annoying. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he's like, I'm not like a huge Jake Paul fan or anything, but like, I think people hate him as a YouTuber, so they're gonna hate everything he does anyway.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
everything the guy does, they're gonna dislike. But on a performance level, the guy is delivering. He's delivering the goods, and he's. I mean, my daughter, who cares nothing about wrestling anymore, watched Jake Paul at WrestleMania.
Logan.
So that tells me something, you know, if she
Yeah.
does YouTube and gaming and all that stuff. So he's bringing a different set of fans there, but I can understand where the animosity of paying the dues comes from. But
Sure.
we all can't make 10 figures boxing. So
If I was fighting in the cornfields, if somebody would have offered me, you know, a couple million to do that, I would have done it. I wouldn't have been like, nah, I gotta pay my dues, you know. I mean, I don't know.
let me pay my dues for $8 and
So, all right. So I'm too much of a purist, but that's okay. Let's get back on it because as we know, Shayna's been paying her dues to get here. The Bodog thing seemed like you were finally getting somewhere, and then that comes apart. But then probably with the influence of Josh at this point, and we've been talking about Josh Barnett, but you spent some time with the Elite XC and the Strike Force promotions, and that I think was really good for your career too, because those were sustained shows at a high level.
Yeah, and they were televised on like, and I mean no disrespect to like Bodog, but they were televised on like a real like Showtime. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That people, I wasn't like, yeah, it's televised on this channel, and it's gonna be at 2 a.m.
Call
or
your
whatever.
cable company to get it.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Like, you
But
can't.
it was a channel that most people had, and you know, Mauro Ranallo's calling the fights, and like it's you know, Elite XC and these guys were
Hey,
know,
Bodog Jeff Osborne was calling the fight, so be careful.
yeah, Jeff was there, yeah. But I just remember like, and I wasn't on the business side of things to know enough. But like it was thought of as a real like competitor to the UFC. You know, Elite XC and this WEC, like at the time these fight promotions were legit, and you had guys that were like the champions, and people going, "Oh man, who's the real best fighter in the world? What if this champ fought this champ?" And it was a cool time. And so, you know, I'm fighting girls that were legit. I fought Jennifer Tate, who was on Fight Girls or whatever that reality show with Gina Carano. There was like a reality Muay Thai show, but she was on that show. I fought you know, and we're doing real stuff. We're doing like stand on a rotating platform and get the whole like like shot for TV stuff, and it was great. Everybody was seeing. I could pull my fights up for people to see.
It was big fight feel. It was definitely the first time that women had a big fight feel.
Did you get a little raise?
I mean, I'm making a little more money this time. Again, it's not like life-changing money, but enough that I'm having to think about taxes now. I'm still working. I'm still working like a part-time job. But yeah, for sure. Like I'm taking training as a job now. It's not just this like hobby I like to do after work. It's like I have to schedule life around. It's part of the reason why I worked at UPS for so long, because UPS is a part-time job that gives you full-time benefits. So I had like full medical, dental, vision, but because it's a part-time job, it was easier for me to like ask for a Friday off so I could leave to go fight on a Saturday type of thing. Because, you know, a full-time job, it's hard. Everybody knows you just can't get time off. Yeah, I used up my days already, but like part-time job, you can kind of like, hey, I can't work Thursday. Can you trade with me or whatever? So it was just easier for me to schedule around training, which was like my number one priority. And so I'm working part-time, I'm training pretty much full-time. And yeah, I'm a real deal fighter. I'm having Josh Barnett as well, who's helping me think about my brand, right? So this is a thing I think still girls today don't think enough about, is like making yourself not be just another female fighter, right?
That's
like all
what
the
I
girls
always wanted. That's
Yeah,
what
and
I
that's
always
and
wanted.
and I was the same. And Tara and I go back and forth on this still today because she's still so like I don't know. She might change it recently a little bit with her grappling stuff she's been doing, but
Well, Josh, I think taught you a professional approach to that because before
Yeah.
that, when you're in the bars, the tendency is like, let's bring the girls out, woo, you know, woo, and in bikinis, or you know, they're trying to do that. That's usually how they market themselves. You
But
know, rest in peace, Shelby Walker. It's simple. You
Right.
guys, Queen of Spades, you guys came up with a sophisticated marketing approach that still works for you today.
and like and the thing of it is that like you have to make yourself irreplaceable because the truth of the matter is if you can be replaced by someone cheaper, they will. Because the UFC is a great example. They've made everyone wear the same clothes. So you can't even
Right.
stand out with your outfit anymore. You can't stand out. It's so difficult to even get to wear a different hat. Like Cowboy Cerrone went through hell just to be able to wear his cowboy hat out when they had a Reebok deal. You know what I mean? So it's like you have to do things that make you irreplaceable or they will replace you. So in order to get to a place where you can go, no, this isn't enough, I want a couple grand more, you have to make it so that they can't go, okay, we'll get someone else. And I think it's like girls, and I mean, and I'm not like specifying anyone, and I'm not, you know, I don't want to, the social media is so weird today and whatnot, but girls do the same thing. Like, you don't pretty yourself up for your pre-fight interview. Like, sure, you want to let everyone know you're this fighter and it doesn't matter, and it doesn't at the end of the day. But you also want people to remember you when the fight's over and not just be, oh yeah, the girl fight. I became, oh, that chick with the guitar that came out, she was awesome. So like, I used to come out with this guitar and heavy metal music, and you know, I got a guitar sponsorship to just walk to the ring with this guitar. Like, and I would be doing pre-fight interviews and Josh would stop me. They'd be like, "Hey Shayna, how you what's your goal today?" And I'd be, oh, I just want to show that women can fight just like the men. And Josh would be like, "Stop. Shayna,
Yeah.
every other girl on the card is going to say that. Like, say something different, you know?" Like,
You were
well,
doing pro wrestling and MMA.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what it takes.
Yes.
I tried to.
People hate on like Rhonda for doing that. She made her whole career on that. You know what I mean? And it's like, look what it did. She made so much more money than any other girl has ever made, and has crossed over into so many other things and got more mainstream. Like, you can hate or love or think she's overrated or whatever, but the way she marketed her fights, and here's a news flash, it was all a work. A lot of it was a work.
Oh my God.
But people like bought into this, and she took advantage of that. And it was
at the same time, what you're talking about too, just to touch on another subject, the thing about Rhonda is, you know, you learn to lose with Kelly, with Amanda, like on a lower level, but you learn, you know, get right back on the bike and get better. You know what I mean? She learned that at the highest and most public level, and that hurts. You know what I mean? That's a lot.
The
that's
most
a lot of,
visible you
good
could
on her
be.
for being with us, though. You know?
Yeah, like the most visible you could possibly be. And the most she even today, like, she gets so much criticism, like in a ridiculously unbalanced amount. Like I said, you can like love her or hate her as a person and think she would, but like the fact that she put eyes on women's MMA, I will to this day say Megumi Fuji is the best fighter that ever lived. I think Ronda's the most important female fighter that's ever lived. And you can argue, if you can argue, oh, but you know, this person would have become a star, this person, well, whatever, right time, right place. Legitimately on tape, Dana White saying there will never be women in the UFC. And it taking Ronda to be that woman. Every opportunity you have as a fighter. Like, we started fighting at these shows in cornfields. I didn't even have the UFC in my mind as like a place to go because it just wasn't on the radar at all. There was no goal. We were just fighting because we loved fighting. Now someone can go to a jiu-jitsu school and watch Amanda Nunes and be like, oh man, I want to do that someday. There wasn't that. We didn't have that. You know what I mean? And you would still be there. It took someone, and it was Ronda, to like jump it to that level. And she got eyes. She was Connor before Connor. Like it's and sure. Connor's another one that's done a great job of being. There needs to be an entertainment side. Not to get on this
always
tangent,
said that.
but the difference between amateur and pro is money, right? If you want to watch the best fighters, the real number one against the real number two, you need to go to like your local promotion. And even then, I'm going to argue that maybe there's a guy who draws more than someone else. Right. But when the difference as a professional is how much money you draw, that is what defines a pro versus an amateur. How much money you draw. So paying attention to how marketable you make yourself is just as important as like your pad work for the day, because you are a professional. And if you're claiming to be a professional, you should also be worrying about what money you can draw, right? Like I've said this, Josh is what really drilled this into my head. And it's like, man, if you want to just be the person fighting the best people, that you go do the Olympics. Like, this is about making money. So we are entertainers. We are sports entertainers. I'm sorry. Do we fight for real? Yes. But we must entertain.
I remember taking a bus trip. I got to go in a minute. I remember taking a bus trip or a van trip with the Lions Den, and Ken Shamrock said something that just upset me so bad. And I said something like, that's how the sport is. He goes, this isn't a sport. He goes, this will never be a sport. And I'm looking at him like, how can you say that? He goes, MMA is not a sport. It's entertainment. It's a company. And like you said, this is all pro wrestling mentality. That's all I ever wanted with MMA was it to be real pro wrestling. That's all I ever wanted.
Yeah. And it took Josh really drilling that into my head to understand that, because previous to that, I was on the side of, no, I'm not going to be selling sex. I want everyone to know me as the fighter. But like, it's making yourself irreplaceable, and being a professional means making yourself irreplaceable and drawing money.
Let's give let's give Josh some other props too, because as far as like mentoring you on the business side, that's all great. But, this is around the same time he was preparing to fight Fedor. He was seriously at the top of the game. That has to have an influence you as well,
Yeah, watching Josh, like I would go and be having fight camp at the same time as him, and watching someone like Josh. Look, Josh is another guy that people love or hate, but like that dude is legitimately one of the top heavyweights there's ever been. And I've seen so many, I'm not gonna like list names, but I've seen so many fighters that that have come through the gym and watched Josh just wreck them in sparring or wrestling. And it was so like I wish I had the quote, but I have a book about Warhammer 40K about one of the soldiers looking at their Primarch, their leader, and being so amazed that they like come from the same gene pool. And so in my martial artsy way, I'd watch Josh and just be like, holy smokes. Like I'm getting like one-on-one, like real deal coaching from this guy. This is nuts.
Yeah. Drink it from the source.
Yeah. And just being like, and at the time he's fighting in Pride. So he's having to train for a 10-minute round. It was impressive to see,
Yep. Now, we talked about you being in there with some of the top girls in the world. Now, one of the fights that Elite XC put you through was Cyborg, Christina Giustino, or she was known back then. We'll call her Justino because I forgot her married name. But what was that like? Now she's a lot bigger than you, no? Talk about that whole thing and all that coming together.
So I was her first fight in the US. So she'd been kind of making waves in Brazil. She's this massive, jacked, aggressive. And so like Cyborg now, like admittedly is far more technically sound than she was when she first came around. She was just over aggressive. She beat girls in her early part of her career just by being more aggressive. by being more violent, more vicious. And so like, this is something we didn't really talk about, but in the early days of MMA, girls got weeded out. Like, people weren't training, but if the girl was meaner, the other girl would kind of fold. And this is kind of what Cyborg did. And so, you know, I'm watching footage of her and I'm like, man, I think I'm more technically sound than her. I think I can beat her. And then I don't know if you could pull this picture up someday. I don't know if it's on ShareDog or something, but I have her in this calf crusher. So I like drop and go for a heel hook and she turns out and I pull her in this calf crusher and she full on just turns. I don't know if I can explain it. If you could pull your heel to your butt and not move your foot and turn around, like her knee should have been gone. Now later we find out why perhaps her joints are more flexible than they should be, but at the time, this is unbelievable. I get her in this submission, she's dead. She's dead to rights. She just turns and faces me. I get completely wigged out. She beats me twice in one fight. And that was the first time, because that was on CBS or something crazy. And that was the first time I had local from my hometown, like reporters coming to the gym to watch me train, doing morning news in my hometown, stuff like this. So this was another jump in professionalism, fighting on like a network TV.
Cool. Now, what happened here? Because with Strikeforce, they eventually sold a bunch of their contracts to the UFC, but it looks like you spent some time back on the smaller circuit, like going back, and you didn't get taken to UFC right away. Why didn't that happen?
So I got caught in the middle where basically I had fought all the fights out on my Show XC contract.
Okay.
And then FCF did an all women's 8-woman tournament over the course of like 2 or 3 shows. And the winner of that tournament, and Shannon Knapp helped put that together. And the winner of that tournament got a Show XC contract. And so it was like, oh, here's my way back in. And that was another really great tournament. There were all these like really high level girls in it. And I ended up winning that tournament. So I'm supposed to get this contract. And that was the time. So it was like, good job, handshake. Shannon Knapp will give me a call. And then they sell to the UFC. So I got stuck where I didn't have a contract with Show XC. So my contract wasn't a part of the contracts that got bought out.
Oh, man.
And so I was just kind of stuck for a second.
And that tournament was Megumi Yabushita, Alexis Davis, and Adriana Jenkins, all, known quantities. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And there were so many happenings. Like, so there was like an ice storm that happened. Those shows were in Oklahoma City. So I'm flying. I have a connection in Detroit, and I'm going to Oklahoma City. And mind you, I travel with a guitar now because this has been a brand. So I have to check an extra bag and pay extra money because it's oversized for this guitar. So the flight gets canceled. Like, flights are getting canceled to Oklahoma City because it's just like an ice storm just all over. So I'm stuck in Detroit airport. I end up getting a hotel because I can't fly out to the next day, which happens to be the day of weigh-in. So now I'm cutting weight in an airport. I'm wearing plastics, trying to walk up and down the terminal. I can't eat because I don't have, like, you go and you can get your healthy, clean foods that you need to cut weight, which isn't a lot, but you still need certain specific things to be able to cut weight easily. But it's airport food, right? So I can't, there's no grocery store. I'm texting Caitlin Young, who made it somehow, who is like, I'm gonna need this and that. I'm texting her things if she could buy me stuff. So long story short, Josh is having the same issue. He's in Denver, flying from California. And he messages me and says, have them put you on a flight to Dallas. We'll rent a car and we'll drive. So I fly to Dallas, rent a car, drive. My luggage, everything gets lost. So all I have is my gear. I'm a pro, so I travel with my fight gear and a carry-on. So all I have is my fight gear. So I have to go and get like socks and underwear and other clothes. I don't have my guitar now. So me and Josh go to Walmart. We buy one of those $80 first act guitars, and I smash it going to the ring. So I come out to Raining Blood by Slayer, and when the metal drops, I smash the guitar, I go to the ring. I win with like a twister and a Cobra twister that people know it. And it was great. And I had fans that came up with pieces of guitar for me to sign. But yeah, that was, and then and I won that tournament. But there was
That's
so
cool.
much going on. It was crazy times.
And you said that was Shannon Knapp, who's I believe obviously launched Invicta afterwards, right? And you spent some time at Invicta before getting the UFC TV show call. Let's take you through the Invicta fights there. How those you fought some high level girls. Sarah McMahon was, a wrestling the highest level wrestler we'd seen at that level,
Still think I won that fight, by the way.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
And,
so
take us through the Invicta years.
Shannon knew me, obviously, so I won that FCF tournament. Shannon was like, "Congratulations, you won the Showtime contract," and then they got bought out. So Shannon knew that I wasn't signed anywhere, which is a funny thing to say because now we're at the point where it's like, are you signed somewhere? Right. So she knew I would want fights, and she knew I could fight. So the first Invicta that happened, she flew me down just to have me sit. It which is unheard of in the world of MMA at that time, to have like, hey, we're gonna fly you down, we're gonna put you in a hotel room, you come to the show. Like, this is crazy. This felt real big time. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm being brought in as a feature to watch the show, and then they announced, and they did the same for Sarah, and they announced us as the headliner for the next Invicta show. So we're sitting next to each other, watching the fights, and then they pan in between rounds. Here's Shayna and Sarah McMahon. They're gonna fight each other. And I fight Sarah McMahon, and it's still so when people that don't know anything about my MMA life want to see something, I still show that fight to them. It's still the fight I'm the most proud of. Argument can be made. I still feel good that I won. But she ends up winning a decision, and we get fight of the night. I get invited back. I beat Sarah DeLalio, and then I fight Alexis Davis.
Yeah.
And she puts me to sleep. She gets me to rear naked choke so for people to understand, the thing about a choke is it's rare that you're like being stubborn. You're not like, I don't care, I'm not tapping, I'm gonna pass out. Like, I remember her getting that in and just being like, okay, I'm fine, I'm gonna get this, I gotta find her hand. And then like the next thing I know, I'm being woken up. Didn't feel, panicky in trouble. It was too long. But Invicta was the first time I felt like I'm like one of the top guys in the promotion. You know what I mean? Like, this is fun. I love fighting here. People know me. I used to go to school in Kansas City, so I'd fill the arena. I was coaching roller derby at the time. They got a bus and came down from Sioux Falls, a 5-hour drive to just come to the arena and be. If anyone knows anything about roller derby, they're crazy. And this was great stuff, and it was stuff that was talked about where I was in the conversation of like, why the heck isn't Shayna in the UFC?
For sure.
And it was a lot of people, Rhonda at the time, just armbarring everyone, and there was some conversation about like, yeah, but Shayna is really well versed in submissions. I'd love to see that fight. Yeah,
it was one of those that you had to get to the UFC first, and it looks like Shannon Knapp either let you go or how'd that come about? Because you went the TV show route. They did the women's show.
Yeah. So I actually remember I was watching a UFC card. Our team, our fight team used to go to Buffalo Wild Wings to watch UFC pay-per-views. And I remember being at Buffalo Wild Wings, and they announced the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, season 18, was going to have females. And for people to understand, The Ultimate Fighter is very much for like up and coming fighters, like people that you've not heard of maybe, or that fight on smaller shows so you wouldn't have a chance to see them otherwise. So in my mind, I'm already beyond this, and I'm like, screw that. Like, I'm not going to do the show. they're going to sign me. But Josh is the one, he talked to me and he's like, listen, like everyone can name season 1 winners, right? Diego, like everyone knows season 1, but how many people can name like the season 12 winners of The Ultimate Fighter? So he said, do you want the first season that there's females? You want some new girl to get more famous than you just because she took advantage of being on this first season? And I was like, that's a good point. And he's like, who cares? It's a bunch of up and comers. Go there, win the show, get in the UFC. You'll be a star. Okay, let's do it. So that was that. I went to do the tryout. The Invicta called me to offer me another fight. And I said, hey man, I'm just letting you know I'm gonna try to get on this Ultimate Fighter show. And they were like, okay, we're okay with that. Just remember that you have fights here if you ever want. And that was kind of where it was left. I got on the
That's cool
Ultimate
that they
Fighter
supported you that way. You know?
Yeah. And, it was always really good because they're obviously Invicta being the place for women now at the time.
Mhm.
Besides, obviously, the UFC, they were very understanding. There was a lot of girls that were going to try to get on the Ultimate
Yeah.
Fighter.
Yeah, that makes sense. How was your experience in the house? What was that like?
Oh, I hated it. I hated that show so much. I always said, I always talk about, that was when I became friends with Jessamine Duke and Rhonda, obviously, and Marina. And the 4 of us end up moving in a house together and the rest is history, whatever. And I always say that if you could equate, and not disrespectfully, but if you could equate our time on the Ultimate Fighter to like serving time in the military, Jessamine is very much the like talk about all her experience. It made her better. And I'm like the guy not wearing any military stuff over in the corner at the VFW, like with my head down and a bottle of whiskey going, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
It was like, I tell you what, that was such a weird, so we have no contact at all with the outside world. We don't have magazines. We don't have books, phones, nothing. So you're already going insane just mentally in the first place. Anytime someone would have to go to a doctor and get, like they feel like they broke their hand, so they'd take them to a doctor, we would be like, what news of the outside world? What did you see on the TV in the waiting room, But just the way, so it's funny because, so I come into the show as the number 1 seed in the house. Okay. People like, I don't want to get too much into why and the mentality and whatever. I lose in the first round. Okay. Now I understand. Okay. The key to all this, and this is all like Josh Barnett training. Okay. So now I have to leverage this. I need to like do a lot of stuff to get TV time. Now the most important thing for me is TV time if I want to leverage this to my advantage. So I have to kind of be the jerk. I have to be a heel in the house. And I understand this. But it's the first time where my career is visible. So I'm coming into this situation where, so it might be, so we're in the house for 7 weeks. It might be week 7. So I fought in the first week. It might be week 7 and they interview us every day in this like confessional booth. And they're like, Shayna, can you just talk us through what's going through your mind as you step into the cage to fight? So I'm saying things like, I'm telling myself, this person doesn't belong in here with me. I've worked so much harder with me than they have. This person should be going to my seminars after this. I'm going to teach her such a lesson. But they'll play this voiceover now during the prep for the fight I have in week 1, over top of like this girl painting her nails or something. So they like re-edit this whole thing to make it look like I'm walking into this. And, the truth is maybe I did come in a little comfortable, but they made it seem so much different than it was. And then it's the first lesson I had where like, the more I tried to explain that, the more people hated me. You know what I mean? Like, it was just this lesson that I learned early on. This is like the rise of social media being a thing. And I'm learning, like, the more you fight against it, the more I really equated in pro wrestling. If you watch like Kurt Angle's career in pro wrestling and how he became a bad guy, like Kurt Angle is someone we should have cheered, right?
Yeah, gold medalist.
He did win
All-American.
the gold medal with a broken freaking neck. That's true. He
Mhm.
should be a hero. But the more he came out and said, I'm a hero, you should cheer for me. I'm a gold medalist with a broken freaking neck. Oh, shut up. Boo. So the more I tried to get clap back on social media with like, no, that's not true. I didn't say that. Whatever, there's video. It was just inundation of hate. And I'm really glad I experienced it then, because it's helped me in my career now to
For
like
sure. And
not
that's
care as much.
that's the blessing of it, right? Because I
Yes.
think what you said is that your career is now public, and I think we couch that because your fights were always public in one way or another. But this is the extracurricular stuff, the other work
Yeah.
you now have to do. That's your first time really having to show it. So that's good that worked out well for you, because a lot of people get stressed out in that house.
Yes. And a lot of people get stressed out in my job today because of social media. And it's something that I can literally, I'm so numb to it because that happened to me. It's like, this person hates me and thinks I have no eyebrows. Hilarious. You know what I mean? Like, like whatever. But I think at the time, I say this it sounds like I'm trying to be sappy, but it's the best way I can explain it. I think what happened to me in that situation is that suddenly I was hated and overrated, and it kind of broke my heart for MMA in such a way that I never really recovered from the feeling that I'd worked all this time, all these years, fighting in cornfields, not getting paid, driving 10 hours, fighting girls that are 200 pounds. And suddenly all that, like that, could be forgotten and not matter. So it was hard for me to justify, like, why am I going to work this hard if it's not going to amount to anything in the end anyway? You're just going to write history as though I didn't do anything. This is stupid. This sport has become, I became jaded. Like, this sport has become full of fans that don't have respect for its history. If they're just going to write history as soon as I lose anyway, what's the point? And I continued fighting because that's what I knew. And you want to bounce back from a loss. And, you know, I'm close friends with Rhonda, and talking to her, it happened to her, but on an even bigger scale now. So it's like, suddenly all the work I've done doesn't matter. Do I want to work hard? Look, I'm fighting Betch Kohea in the UFC. And I remember the first round, I did whatever I wanted to her. I'm not joking. I did whatever I wanted to her. Didn't finish her. I remember sitting on the stool in between rounds looking at her, and I remember just being like, I don't care to work hard. Like, it was like the moment I knew. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you ever see video of me getting lit up on the cage by her, man, I'm telling you the truth. I was just I remember she was punching me, and she paused. And I remember having a visual conversation, like with our eyes, where I was like, come on, like, just hit me hard enough to end this. I'm letting you. You know, I just didn't. You hear old fighters talk about like not having the hunger anymore, and like I wasn't hungry anymore. I hated it. It seemed pointless. You have to bust your ass to even be average in MMA.
Yeah.
You know? And like, I didn't find the worth in busting my ass anymore because it already got taken away from me. The 15 or so years, at least that's how I felt at the time. You know what I mean?
But I think that's justified because, I mean, the bottom line is really, you know, the respect and that kind, you know, that's your only reward, because it's not like, you know, you were sitting on a big house and, you know, that $3,000 car from Bodog probably wasn't any good anymore, right? You know what I mean? So it's like and once that goes, I could see it being a shattering experience. So now talk about, we're getting here towards the end, where you did happen to fight Amanda Nunes, who went on to, you know, beat Ronda, take over
Mhm.
and be, you know, possibly the women's GOAT and stuff.
She beat
How-
Cyborg. She's
Yeah. How do you feel like, you know, that was a matchup where you did, you know, you didn't get taken out. You did a serviceable, good job. You know, you still could have competed.
I think physically, definitely. She ended up. I tore my MCL that match, which is why it got stopped. And I know physically and strategically, mentally, I definitely had it in me. I know I did. I just didn't care, and it's the best way I can explain it. I remember I came out to the ring to fight Nunes. I heard everyone in the audience, which is a weird thing. You don't hear that stuff when you're in it. My knee went and I felt it. That was another weird thing. Like
Mhm.
you don't. I don't know how to explain it to people that haven't fought. It's they're not gonna understand. But you know you're getting hit, but it doesn't hurt. It hurts
Mhm.
later, later that night. You know what I mean, or
Yeah.
tomorrow for the next few days. But
Like you're watching yourself.
I was very out of it in the ring, outside of the situation in the ring, and I just couldn't find a way back. I don't know. I can't explain it. And I remember sitting in the back. I remember the Nunes fight, and like I remember consciously looking at the arena because this was a huge arena. We were in Rio. And I remember looking around because I was like, this is the last time I'm going to be in front of a crowd like this. Little did I know, like my career changed. And now 2 weeks ago, I'm in front of 80,000 people doing stuff. But, you know, at the time, I'm
Mhm.
just like, I need to take this in because this is it. Because I just knew I was done.
Wow.
And I remember this is very weird. And Josh is a very like hard ass coach. He's not someone that like gives compliments easy. He's not surprise, surprise. He's not like a lovey-dovey guy. But I remember being in the back. You know, I go to medical to get looked at, and I remember him hugging me in a way that was like he knew. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like he grabbed the back of my head, put my face on his shoulder, and I just remember him leaning like it was just an understanding. Like we knew, you know? I
Mhm.
just I just didn't have it anymore. So then, you know, a few weeks later he comes to me, and the thing is that a fight contract is something, for example, we promise you 4 fights over the next 2 years. I'm just making numbers up, but it'll be something
Mhm.
like this. But you could fight, and it could be another year till you get a fight. So you don't know when you're going to fight next. But we knew with the knee injury and with a couple losses in a row, I'm at the way back of the line now. So Josh, knowing that I kind of hate MMA anymore, is like, "Hey, what do you think we ask the UFC if they'll let you do some pro wrestling?" And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "You know, just to keep you in shape, take your mind off of fighting for a while. What do you think? Let's ask him." Okay. And he asked them, and they said no. So that was when we were like, "Okay, can we just have ask for release?" So there was I don't even know what the limitations are now, but it was like, if I ever want to fight again, we tried to make a deal where it's like, how about if I just wrestle, and if I ever want to start fighting again, I still have that. And they're like, nah, we're just gonna release you. Like, okay, cool. Um, so you know, I started pro wrestling. I started having a lot of success. I go to Japan and live there. And while I'm there, so Japanese pro wrestling is like, in a lot of ways, it's like more hardcore than MMA. It's
Mhm.
weird to say that. People that just know pro wrestling as like the fake stuff aren't going to understand. In Japan, they take pro wrestling very serious. That's why a lot of their guys, Sakuraba is a pro wrestler. He puts that as
Mhm.
his martial art. But they treat pro wrestling like a martial art. So a lot of their stuff looks like what you would see in the UFC. Just in a ring. Uh, so I'm over there and I'm like, man, I'm over here pro wrestling. You know what I want to do for my own self? I want to take an MMA fight because that's what Josh, that's what Billy, that's what all these guys did before me, and I'm coming up in their shoes. And I just feel like this is like the nature of me. I explained it like this is me getting my black belt from Josh Barnett. I want to do this pro wrestling MMA tour. And
Okay.
so Friday night, I main evented at Korakuen Hall against Io Shirai, who's arguably the best female wrestler in the world. Saturday, I weighed in. Sunday, I fought in 155, which I fought at 135. So I just had to not eat breakfast that morning. And it was weird rules. It was like 2 rounds, and if it's a tie, you get a 3rd round. So I take this fight against this girl, they're hyping, and it ends up being a tie. And so we fight a 3rd round. And then at the end of this round where I ground and pounded her to death, she won the decision, whatever. But the whole point of it is, and as an experienced like fighter, you have to know you can't let it go to decision in someone else's country. But all that aside, when I called Josh, because he couldn't make it to corner me, I just had a couple of my pro wrestler Japanese Joshi wrestlers come corner me. I said, you know what? I had fun though. And he was like, here's the thing. That's the first time I've heard you say that in years. Like about training, about fighting. You said you had fun. We did it. You know, we did it. So that was like, I kind of found my love. And you'll still hear me like be a grumpy old whatever about MMA. Yeah, kind of like Osborne, I'm sure. Where like I'm a fan, but there is still stuff where I'm like, oh jeez. But you know, I teach grappling once a week in Orlando. Like I'm back into training again, which is good, and I've come out on the other side of this. But definitely there was this and I said this in a blog. They made us blog every week while the Ultimate Fighter was going on. And I said, like, there's so many fighters whose careers have been cut short, I'm certain, because the fans turned on them and it took their taste away. And I wish fans understood, and there's no way we can really understand, but all the epic fights that we've been robbed of because you wanted to hate on Twitter. And that sounds so minimal to like break it down to that, but like that and obviously I'm on the other side of it and I'm loving life now and I'm living the dream, but like it definitely is the reason. Like I think if it was like the old days, if it was like Bodog and I lost to Tara and nobody knew, but there was a niche group of fans, right? So people were like, man, what a great fight. Shayna looked really good that fight. I didn't really get any hate for losing to Tara. But I lose on the Ultimate Fighter, and now there's these mainstream casual fans, and it's a completely different group, and now I'm overrated, and I talk, you know, it was just, it definitely ended my career sooner than I was physically ready to be done. But it's something that had to happen. I had to have some physicality left to beat people up in a different sport, right?
Yeah. It's kind of it really had the makings of like, you know, like I don't want to say tragedy, might be too strong a story, but you know, there are a lot of guys that are retired that didn't get full satisfaction out of their career, don't have something that they moved on to, and now they are, you know, they've got some bitterness or whatever. Yeah. And you've got it behind you. You've got successes now that you can measure, and you know, it turned into an absolutely fantastic story. I can't think of too many people that, you know, I think what you said, Chavo Guerrero pointed out, you know, we know that he's a wise man, right? You know, in the ways of the business, but I think he nailed it right on the head that you paid your dues in a little bit of a different sport, but man, you know, those dues, we've been talking about it for an hour and a half, you know?
Yeah.
So,
and it's definitely, you know, when I look at pro wrestling now, and, you know, pro wrestling is its own monster. There's definitely people that only know the pro wrestling world that maybe take things more serious than they should. And I think that the reason I'm a little more laid back perhaps than I should be, it could be argued, but definitely more laid back than I have to be, is because I look at this as like, I'm very fortunate. It's like you said, there's fighters that did all this and never really got anywhere. And it's like, You spend full-time job for no money training every day. Your whole life is around training. This should be your job, you know, and you make pennies. And still today, fighters don't get paid enough.
No.
But there's to spend almost 2 decades doing that and still have another avenue that's happened to me. And sure, did I bust my ass and work hard? I'm not saying I didn't and all of that. But I'm definitely very lucky that I got a second, almost like a continue button, like a second life. Because nobody taught us anything. I didn't put money away like maybe I should have. I didn't make a plan for like what I'm going to do after fighting. There was no afterthought. And I know that's very, very, very common for fighters nowadays. So I'm very grateful for this like opportunity that I have to maybe make a future for maybe a family or something someday. I can help take care of my sister and my nieces and I'm very fortunate. But at the same time, I'm also very fortunate for all of that 2 decades of, I guess, struggle, and highs and lows and whatnot. But that made it so that I can be in the position I am today. And to have been competitive, like not just fighting, but competitive during a time where all this history, and even take my pro wrestling career on top of that. So, you're talking about, back in the day, I'm the first headline in Sioux Falls, women. Now I'm like the second fight on CBS after Gina and Kedzie. Now I'm on the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. Now I'm in the first ever all women's WWE tournament. Now I'm in the first cage match televised women on TV. Like there's all these historic moments that I've been not just around to witness, but I've been a part of, that I'm very fortunate that I'm active during this
You're
time.
fortunate, but you put in the work, and part of everything too is having instincts, like who to trust and stuff, because Josh, you mentioned Josh is a unique flavor. He's not for everybody.
Right.
But if you think you can't get something out of him, or learn from him, people are making a mistake there. And I think that, as a student, he should be very proud of you because you've done outstanding in 2 fields, and, he deserves credit too. So that's a nice way to end it, Shayna. I appreciate it so much because it really is a career that I think you're still writing. I think that they are all interrelated.
I feel the same, and every step leads to the next. And I think my career, my fight career, to my wrestling career, I think the whole bottom line underlying thing is like, I tell people this all the time when they ask for advice on being a wrestler or a fighter. Just be ready to work as hard as you can for way longer than you think is fair. And 2, be a good person. And all of the rest will pan out. And it might not be what you think panning out means, but it will. You just got to stick to that. So I think I'm just a good example of
that. Now I'll end it with this. When we were off camera before the interview, my son came on and I showed, he hugged me and he saw you. And then when we had the interview, he came back with a picture of you and Rhonda in WrestleMania this last weekend. So he was like, I know her. So for sure, it couldn't happen to, there are a lot of people I would say they deserve good, you're one of those people and you're getting it. And that makes me very happy. I'm so happy to have caught up with you, and, God bless, man. We'll see each other at some point, catch up.
Yeah, for sure.
Keep knocking them out for us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, man. Bye-bye.